Social injustice, violence within Native communities. What is the issue? Poverty can't be confined to a single definition, although it's generally understood to be a place with an inadequate financial situation. As a result, these individuals don't have basic food, shelter, and clothing. Living in these areas presents many challenges. Poverty in Native communities is an ongoing issue that needs to be addressed. In 1995, 55.6% of Native people living in Canadian cities were poor. It is in these conditions that crime rates can rise. Violence within Native communities is an ongoing issue that has escalated dramatically. Poverty and violence reinforce each other, and it isn't possible to tackle one without the other. Indigenous people have considerably less legal rights than other Canadians. They are subject to discrimination. 22% of Natives appearing in court face 4 or more charges compared to only 13% of non-Natives. Once charged, 48% of Natives see their lawyers for less than an hour, whereas 46% of non-Natives see their lawyers for 3 hours or more. And only 21% of Native offenders get a reduced sentence or a discharge. Their social and economic disadvantage puts them in a vulnerable position which is difficult to escape, and as a result, the cycle of poverty and crime repeats. How do we know that this is an injustice? Justin Trudeau has only been Prime Minister for a little over a month, but he has already made plans to help Native Canadians. Through Policy Resolution 61, he recognizes that we must work together with Indigenous people in the spirit of cooperation and mutual respect, and he will do this within a reasonable timeline. Also, an educational program will be implemented to inform Canadians of the history and background of Indigenous people. There have been many news articles written about Native issues in Canada, but I focused on one specifically produced by CBC, and this article writes about the systemic racism in Canada. Howard Sapers, a correctional investigator for Canada, said that nobody designed the program to be discriminatory, but in fact, there are different outcomes between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal inmates. Native awareness. Natives are trying to bring awareness to their current situation and get some help through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. The TRC focuses on 2 main components, truth and reconciliation. Truth is informing people of Native issues, specifically residential schools, but it can also be applied to the judicial system. And also reconciliation, which is just public awareness, education, and engagement. What critical questions must we ask ourselves? What is poverty? What kind of conditions do Natives live in? How can we reverse the effects of poverty? Are some people more susceptible to violence than others? Are Natives treated justly when it comes to the law? Are incarceration rates reflective of the community? How do sentences for Indigenous people differ then from other Canadians? Who pays for Native representation in courts? How is the court process different for Natives as opposed to other Canadians? Has the Catholic Church acknowledged the injustices they committed against Indigenous people? Contributing factors. There is a high correlation between childhood domestic victimization and subsequent victimization in later life, and as a result, the cycle of poverty and violence repeats itself. It has been proven that communities with the high unemployment rate have more exposure to violence in comparison to other Canadian communities. Studies have shown that substance abuse contributes to problems such as the breakdown of the family and an increase in poverty, which feeds the cycle of violence. Whose voices need to be heard? Native youth. They are the ones that are most susceptible to falling into the cycle of poverty and violence. Native women. They are often the victims of domestic abuse. Before the Europeans came, women were equal in respect to power, authority, and honor. However, as colonization progressed, women's rights diminished. The Native community. Police often discriminate against Native people. The government. The government is partially responsible for many Native issues, so it would be very important to see what they have to say. And the legal system. Some lawyers specialize in fighting Native issues in court, but this isn't always the case. Because of low incomes, Indigenous people are less likely to have the finances to obtain proper legal representation. Natives can apply for legal aid, but legal aid rejects over 6,500 applicants. Pope visits. Pope John Paul came to Canada in 1984, specifically Yellowknife. While in Canada, he met with the natives of Canada and delivered a speech. In this speech, he paid homage to the Native Canadians by acknowledging that they weren't treated justly. It is clear from historical record that over the centuries, your people have been repeatedly the victims of injustice by newcomers who, in their blindness, often saw all your culture as inferior. In 2009, Pope Benedict came to Canada and met with a delegation of Native Canadians and expressed sorrow for the deplorable acts which were committed, especially at the residential schools. Two popes have acknowledged that the Catholic Church was in the wrong and were apologetic. The fact that both Pope John Paul and Pope Benedict released statements about Native injustices speaks volume. In order to help solve these injustices, awareness needs to be raised. With awareness, people can begin to make a change. Bible passage. There is a passage from Mark chapter 12, verse 31, where Jesus was talking to the teachers of the law when they asked him what the greatest commandment out of all of them were. Jesus replied, "The second is this, love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these." Jesus calls us to love one another, and standing by while Native Canadians live in poverty is not carrying out Jesus' plan for us. Additionally, acting violently and committing crimes is not treating your neighbors with love. In the Catechism, I found section 1941, which states that socioeconomic problems can be resolved only with the help of all forms of solidarity. Solidarity of the poor among themselves and between the rich and poor. Currently in our society, there is a huge divide between natives and non-natives. This separation comes from the centuries of discrimination towards Indigenous people. We stripped them of their culture, spirituality, language, and way of living, and this was wrong. However, if we want to right the wrongs, we must work together with the Indigenous people. No matter what differences we have, we must put them aside in a sense. We are called to collaborate with each other, and it is only when we have open minds and hearts that solidarity can be achieved. What is being done? The Seabird Island First Nations Sustainable Community Project. It's a program designed to provide communities with suitable housing. The housing project is affordable, energy efficient, environmentally friendly, and durable. A major sustainable community has been recently completed in 2013. The houses are affordable and they were built using local resources. The Family Violence Protection Program has one main goal, and that is to improve the safety and security of Native women, children, and families. And there's two aspects. This program has reached many Native communities and helped them. What can we do? The first step is to learn the history. Natives are a huge part of Canada. In 2006, there were 1 million people who identified as Native. It is important to learn about their history. Step 2 is to help the community conditions. Through charitable organizations, money can be raised to help Native communities, and you can set up your own fundraising events to help alleviate some of the hardships that Natives have to endure. For example, Books with No Bounds was an organization created by 2 Oakville teenagers to send books to Native communities. Step 3 is to set up victim support groups. Children exposed to violence were 10 to 17 times more likely to have serious emotional and behavioral problems when compared to children who are raised in a non-violent home environment. If children are raised in a household with violence, they will continue the cycle of violence in their homes. Together, we can create change.